Welcome to our channel, a portal to a universe where every frame tells a tale and each review leads to cinematic wonders. Get ready to be immersed in the enchanting world of film, where our passionate crew of cinephiles will accompany you through a range of emotions, from laughter to tears, as we discover the magic that makes movies unforgettable. Today, we'll watch a review video about House of the Dragon Season 2, Episode 2, Regent. After last week's episode, House of the Dragon Season 2 takes a more subdued step back, seemingly to let both us and the characters mourn the show's most significant loss, Rhaenys and her dragon Malaise. This also allows for some breathing room for both the story and audience. Both the Greens and the Blacks lost lives in the horrific aftermath of the Battle of Rook's Rest. Aegon and his dragon Sunfire survived being dracarized by Aemond and his dragon Vhagar. However, the king's life is currently hanging by a thread, leaving a space at the head of the table for someone to assume power, as episode 5 illustrates with harsh clarity, particularly where Alicent is concerned. Sometimes the biggest power grabs don't come from your enemies but the people who are positioned much closer. Criston Cole's army is said to be returning triumphantly from Rook's Rest, parading Malaise head through the city and blaming Aegon for defeating the treasonous dragon. If such a performance was intended to inspire joy and renewed faith in the people, it does the opposite. At least one member of the audience remarks that it is a black omen, a terrible foreshadowing of what is to come, while another voice points out that Rhaenyra will most likely have an answer for this abomination. As for Aegon himself, however, the gravely wounded king is quietly shuttled through the city and into the Red Keep in a covered box, without ceremony, so that none of the small folk can bear witness to the true scope of his injuries while they're distracted by the more public display of Malaise's head. As Grand Maester Orwyle observes in his initial assessment of Aegon's wounds, there are burns that seem to cover a majority of the king's body, in addition to the numerous broken bones he sustained when he and Sunfire plunged to the ground. Right now, Aegon is hovering on the precipice between life and death, and it's anyone's guess whether he'll conquer the latter. In the meantime, however, as Aemond observes, someone will have to be appointed to rule in his stead, and the question of who that someone will be hangs over most of the episode. Alicent seems increasingly uneasy around her younger son, especially now that she's noticed him wearing Aegon's catspaw dagger, and seeks Criston out directly to ask him about Aemond's part in all this. Whether the Hand of the King knows the truth or is as in the dark as many others is unclear, but his loyalty to Alicent also only seems to run so deep. When the small council convenes, Alicent is the one to put the idea of a regent on the table, initially suggesting herself for the position since she held a similar one when Viserys, Paddy Considine, was in his final years. Yet the rest of the council balks at the idea of a woman serving as regent, particularly in a time of war. The obvious choice, one points out, is the king's immediate successor, Aemond. While Alicent doesn't outwardly accuse her son of having a hand in his brother's current state, she does push back at the idea, instead directly referencing Aemond's age and lack of restraint. But as she looks around the table, very few seem willing to meet her gaze. Orwyle attempts to argue in her favor, but he's overridden by everyone else. Larys, Tywin Lannister, Jefferson Hall, and Jasper Wilde are all backing Aemond. Even Criston, who has remained silent up until this point, doesn't take Alicent's side, voting in favor of her son. As Aemond assumes a new seat at the head of the table, in the king's seat, Alicent finally seems to come to the conclusion that her voice in this room is truly gone, especially once Aemond declares that no one in King's Landing will be allowed to leave, and the gates should be barred immediately. Later, when Alicent confronts Criston about his decision to go against her, all that the Hand witnessed at Rook's Rest is now confirmation that they have officially given this war to the dragons, so it should be a dragon rider who leads them. It's difficult to mourn during war, but even more difficult when you seem to be the only one doing so. When the episode opens with Corlys and Rhaenyra each having a private moment to remember Rhaenys, it seems to be the show pointing out that this is as long as they'll be afforded to grieve before having to get back to it. For Rhaenyra, this means dealing with a small council who levies misogynistic remarks at her that are anything but subtle, referring to Daemon's absence from Dragonstone as the consequence of a marital spat, among other things. Ser Alfred Broom is arguably the most vocal among them, and his impertinence and unwillingness to defer to Rhaenyra seem to mostly stem from his belief that women are not as suited to the business of war as men. As Rhaenyra observes, however, they have had peace all this time. Alfred has seen no more war himself, so attempting to argue about who's more qualified is a pointless endeavor. One of the clear parallels between Rhaenyra and Alicent in this week's episode is the fact that they have both been fighting to keep their voice in their small council meetings up until now, but where Alicent finds herself swallowed up, talked around, and ignored, left to wallow in her own humiliation, Rhaenyra forces her way back into the conversation, reasserting herself and her authority while demanding answers that her advisors can't necessarily give. It also doesn't help that her closest allies, with the exception of Corlys and Mysaria, are made up of either men who second-guess her every decision or children who are barely adults themselves. Jace even takes it upon himself to go and do some negotiating on Rhaenyra's behalf without running it by her first. Initially, his intention is to fly to Harrenhal and find out what's going on with Daemon, but then Jace decides to meet with House Frey, since they control a critical passage in the Riverlands through the twins. With access there, Rhaenyra would no longer need to wait for Daemon to secure things now that more of her allies are marching south. While Baela doesn't inform Rhaenyra of Jace's plan until after he's already departed. It turns out that Jace is actually pretty good at negotiating, although he's also making promises, like giving the phrase control of Harrenhal, that he might not be able to keep. As for Daemon, he's been better. Between failing to earn a surrender from the Brackens, even under threat of death by dragonfire, and having dreams about becoming intimately entangled with a mysterious woman who turns out to be his mother Alyssa, Episode 5 emphasizes that he really needs to get it together from a tactical as well as a headspace standpoint. To make matters worse, he discovers that Harrenhal only has enough gold to barely keep the fires going, thanks to Larys transferring most of the family funds to King's Landing after his father and brother died in Season 1. Ser Simon Strong suggests Daemon reach out to Rhaenyra to provide the coin they need, an idea that Daemon instantly shuts down out of sheer stubbornness, before insisting that he'll do the crowdfunding himself. At Rhaenyra's side, one could argue that Daemon was perfectly suited to the role of lieutenant, and he certainly has experience fighting battles, but on his own, he's never been more rudderless, strutting around and insisting that everyone refer to him as a king. It's something that doesn't escape the attention of the witchy Alice Rivers, who bullies him into accepting a bandage for his hand when he overdoes it on the rebuilding efforts in Harrenhal. When she questions whether Daemon's strategy has been Rhaenyra approved, that's the moment when we get the first honest look at how Daemon feels about all of this, as well as his ultimate plan. When I take King's Landing, Rhaenyra is welcome to join me there and take her place by my side. Rhaenyra, however, has her own strategy this week, asking Ser Alfred to go to Harrenhal and ascertain Daemon's intentions since he keeps ignoring her ravens. The timing couldn't be more urgent, especially since the River Lords have shown up at Harrenhal in the dead of night and are pissed with Daemon for sicking the Blackwoods on the Brackens after their initial refusal to surrender. Apparently, the Blackwoods took it a step way too far in some instances, ransacking sacred places and murdering innocents, all while carrying Rhaenyra's red and black banners. It seems that Rhaenyra's biggest PR problem isn't anything having to do with her decision-making, but Daemon himself. Although Rook's Rest was one of the bloodiest battles in the Dance of the Dragons to date, it might be something much more innocuous and unexpected that has the potential to topple Rhaenyra's enemies. As Mysaria reminds Rhaenyra, the power of the small folk shouldn't be underestimated, and later on, we see the Queen's loyal lady-in-waiting Elinda sneaking into King's Landing to meet with none other than Diana, the servant girl whom Aegon sexually assaulted during the events of the first season. Between the brewing discontent among the small folk and the ominous omen that Malay's head represents, not to mention Aemon's decision to close the city gates, Rhaenyra may have thousands of people willing to fight in her name from within the walls of King's Landing itself if the right word spread. Beyond that, as Rhaenyra and Jace discover they have 2 more dragons to deploy, the issue arises, who still has the blood of old Valyria in their veins to potentially ride them? That's the end. Unlock the secrets of storytelling through our video, our YouTube channel's guide to the art of cinema. Join us as we delve into the narratives, the characters, and the sheer enchantment that movies bring to our lives. From script to screen, we've got it all covered. Join us as we analyze, critique, and appreciate the magic of movies. Subscribe to our channel for more videos.